Hi guys, Dr. Rob Barrington here with some more nutrition advice. I'd like to talk today a little bit about coffee and some of the myths and the rumours that surround the coffee consumption. Now, before we start, it's important to understand the difference between consuming filtered coffee and consuming instant coffee. Filtered coffee is a minimal processing step that produces a drink that is made from the coffee bean. You use whole coffee beans in the process, and therefore filtered coffee is really closer to tea in terms of its processing. It's a minimal processing step in order to be able to make a drink from the bean. Instant coffee is very different because instant coffee is a very processed product. It produces a freeze-dried granule that is then added to water in order to make a drink. Now, that process may decrease some of the levels of phytonutrients within the drink, and therefore instant coffee may not have the same effects as filtered coffee. So that's an important distinction to make. First of all, really what I'm talking about here is filtered coffee, the less processed product. To be fair and talk about instant coffee, you really would need to compare it with freeze-dried instant tea, which is never really done. So it's disingenuous really to go down that route. So I'm not really talking about instant coffee here. Personally, I don't think instant coffee is a healthy food. It's certainly losing some of the phytonutrients from the coffee bean. It still retains the caffeine, and whether it's a beneficial product, I would say possibly not. I would suggest that if you want to drink coffee, that you stick to the filtered variety. Now let's go back to filtered coffee. Studies have looked at coffee consumption on individuals, and they do show that you get an increase in heart rate and you get an increase in blood pressure in the subjects. Now this sounds like, well, perhaps coffee does have some detrimental cardiovascular effects. If you're constantly getting an increase in blood pressure and you constantly get an increase in heart rate, that may put a stress on the cardiovascular system. However, many of these studies that have found these effects have given coffee to people who don't habitually consume it, and therefore the results are disingenuous, because what we really need to look at is people who consume coffee regularly. Now, those people who do consume coffee regularly, there have been large epidemiological studies that have looked at data. There have been meta-analysis and reviews. Generally, those people who do consume coffee regularly do not have any detrimental health outcomes. They don't have an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. They don't have an increased risk of any of the diseases really that have been looked at. However, they may be protected from neurological degeneration, and this may be an effect of the caffeine stimulating the mind through the caffeine in the coffee, or it may be some other effect, perhaps because of the antioxidants. In a similar way to tea, coffee may be protective against neurodegeneration such as Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease. It could be the caffeine, it could be the antioxidants, it may be a combination of both, but both of these drinks appear to be protective. Now, just as with tea, coffee contains a number of antioxidants, a number of phytonutrients that are biologically active. They get into our tissues and they inhibit oxidative processes, and therefore they can be classed as free radical scavengers. In particular, there is a group of chemicals called the hydroxycinamates, and one of the hydroxycinamates that has been studied is caffeic acid, and caffeic acid has a quinone that is called chlorogenic acid, which has also been studied, and these two chemicals do appear to provide antioxidant defences to those people who consume filtered coffee regularly. There are another group of chemicals called the diterpenes. One of the diterpenes is called cawahol, and the other one is called cafestol, and these chemicals too have been investigated, and they do have antioxidant effects. They are biologically active. They do decrease oxidative stress in humans. So just as with tea, there are antioxidants in coffee as well, and this is often overlooked. Coffee is seen as a drink that you take to get the caffeine and the hit. But really, when you compare coffee and tea, they're very similar in terms of the effects that they have. The main difference between coffee and tea is that tea contains a chemical called L-theanine, which is an amino acid, which appears to increase alpha wave state in the brain, and this has a calming effect. Now, because coffee doesn't contain L-theanine, the caffeine tends to have the overriding effect, and coffee does seem to cause more of a stimulatory effect than tea. But in the long term, in those people who habitually consume both tea and coffee, there appears to be no detrimental effects to the health. And in fact, both drinks appear, from evidence in the nutritional literature at least, to actually provide health benefits, particularly with regard to the brain. So what I would suggest is that if you regularly drink tea, you regularly drink coffee, I would continue to. Coffee is a healthy drink. It contains phytonutrients. There are antioxidants within the coffee bean, and they end up in the coffee pot, they end up in the coffee cup, and then they end up in our tissues where they have a beneficial effect. There is no reason to avoid coffee. Coffee is a healthy drink. The type of coffees that I would avoid are instant coffees, but then I would avoid instant tea as well because they're processed foods. And as you know from listening to my videos or reading my blog, I'm a big advocate of eating foods in their whole food form. The less processing you have in foods, the better. Processed foods tend to have detrimental health effects, whereas unprocessed foods tend to have beneficial effects, particularly if they're plant-based. So I would suggest that if you drink filtered coffee or you drink tea, that you continue to do so. I would enjoy it. They're both very good drinks. I drink both tea and coffee. I don't see any reason why you would want to give up either of those drinks, and both drinks have weight loss effects. They tend to keep people leaner. Those people that drink more tea and coffee tend to be leaner than those people who abstain from both drinks. So my recommendation is to enjoy tea and coffee. Don't overdo it. People have differing tolerances to tea and coffee. You'll know your own tolerance. If you're sensitive to them, drink less. If you're not sensitive to them, well, the antioxidants they provide are going to help you defend yourself against disease. They're going to help defend yourself against aging. And from the evidence in the nutritional literature, those people who drink tea and coffee have less of an effect, less of a risk of developing neurodegeneration. So they should help you stay healthy for longer, particularly into old age.